Okay, Adele, thank you for doing this.
Always a pleasure.
Let me say a bit about who you are for the people watching. So Adele McLean is a vice president at Holden Advisors. She leads our consulting engagements and she also leads our sales workshops. So we've created coaching workshops, but then also the workflow tools, the application afterwards. And I thought we had a couple of different starting points from our last conversations that I wanted to pick up on, especially now that so much discounting and cost cutting is happening. So here we are.
Yeah, here we are. A little bit of a slowdown, maybe. I don't know, for some, maybe not for others.
Exactly. So maybe we start with, what's your perspective just on what's happening in general with cost cutting and the impact on sellers in the last couple of weeks?
Well, I feel like what I'm hearing in workshops is a little bit of fear, because everybody knows when they start hearing the big executives talk about cost cutting, that it means that they'll probably have less support in the field, maybe no training, things like that, things that always come off the table when they actually really need the support in a different level to hold their price, if not get a better price. And just with my experience in high tech, I think what happens when that cost-cutting focus comes into play and it's kind of like just so focused, people start to get fearful. Is my job safe? Is my team's job safe? Is my customer support folks safe? And then there's this whole kind of push for more revenue in times of trouble, right? So there's a lot of pressure on sellers to hold it all together. And I think the focus on cost cutting can just bring a lot of fear into the organization, and probably unnecessary fear, which then unfortunately leads to fear-based discounting to close your deals and make the quarter. And I feel like people need to maybe think about it a little differently. I think I told you last time, Tracy, there was a really smart chief operating officer of one of our clients who said, think about all the time we spend on understanding our costs to like the micro penny. I think that was the term he used. And what if we just thought about pricing at least half of that time, or even 25% of the time? We spend so many hours of the week focused on cost cutting, and you really in the wrong place, because cost cutting can only go so far. Discounting is a bigger cut to profit. If you discount, it's going to be a lot more cost cutting to kind of keep it all balanced. So what if we had organizations actually lean more towards understanding pricing instead of just setting pricing, and helping sellers actually achieve the price level and get through all the games that are played? So that's kind of what I'm hearing. Even a couple of weeks ago with the UK team that I was with, this whole notion of so much focus on cost. How about as a team we all focus on price and not cave in times of trouble in our pricing? So I don't know if that answers the question, but
it does, because I think there's a few things I'm hearing. One is just overall from a trend perspective, the cost cutting is getting louder and louder just in the narrative across business. Yeah. But I also think there's an impact on that you probably have a unique vantage point on, which is seeing multiple companies in a lot of different sales organizations that then, operate from fear and see that impact their discounting and their results ultimately, kind of bigger picture.
Yeah. And I think you have to ask yourself before you give that discount, did anything really change? Is my product actually possibly more valuable than it was last time I negotiated? If you don't think like that and be confident like that, then you're going to just give that discount, and then it's a cycle. Like, we gave that discount, our margins went down, now we got to cut more cost. It's just such a terrible cycle to be in. So I think people need to really think, did anything really change with the value I deliver before I give a fear-based discount?
Yeah. The cycle also, I would imagine, you're in a, what's the end point? Like, how low can you go with the discounting? You're like, get more, take more off. And then at what point have you said, okay, enough is enough, we really can't do this anymore? And you're looking at big impact on bottom line, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in negotiating with Backbone, we talk about that being the profit death spiral. Typically, we think about it in terms of when a competitor lowers their price. Maybe they have their price right in the market because they offer lower value. If you think about, here we are. So a competitor comes in and you react to that. So you don't reduce the value you deliver. You just line up with that competitive price point. And then what's the competitor going to do? Move again. And the same thing happens, if you think about lining up with a competitor, even if they're in the right value continuum, but also in the cost cutting world, like we
Mm.
have to, if a seller's told, we got to cut costs, and they hear it from their procurement professionals as well, then they're going to think they owe them a discount. It's going to create that profit death spiral. And in the end, you can only go so far, and then you go out of business. So I think focusing on price and value is much more important than cost cutting for an organization.
In that reframing, where do you start with people? How do you set them up to start to shift how they're looking at things and how they're behaving?
We get a lot of aha moments in executive sessions, which are a couple of hours of the executive team's time. And I've heard people like the CEO said, "My God, if we just spent more time on pricing instead of cost cutting, what could we do?" But a lot of times people realize they've been gamed as well, and that's hard. If you're in the C-level and you realize the customer played me, you got to really think about it from a different perspective. There are games being played. You might have been part of them in the past. You might have been a rabbit before. It's okay. It's time to be vulnerable and admit it. And then really think about what we have to change as executives, not to follow that path the next time. I mean, that's all you can do is recognize and adjust. And so a lot of times executives will say, I'm not giving my sellers enough time. I'm spending a lot of time with the manufacturing or the people creating products, but I'm not actually giving enough time to my sales organizations. And I don't mean just the sales leader, but how could we impart the confidence that we're going to stand behind them on these difficult conversations and in a difficult time? And where are we going to invest in a difficult period? And help salespeople be confident about the pricing. So I think that's a big recognition from the C-suite. We
Yeah.
don't spend enough time on that revenue generating side of things. And pricing is not math. We talk about it a lot. It is an art and a science. And when executives understand art and science, not just science, then they can start to get into that mindset they need to have.
Yeah. This whole idea of getting played at the executive level, can you talk a little bit more about, first of all, we should say what the rabbit is. Can you tell us what that means? How that shows up? Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really pretty simple. We talk about negotiating with backbone. There are 2 tools, 4 buyer types, and 8 selling scenarios. So the rabbit is one of the 8 selling scenarios when you are dealing with a poker player, which is either a relationship buyer or a value buyer acting like they're a price buyer. So we have to start to, think to ourselves, do they really want to buy on price? There's not many people that buy on just price. So we got to remind ourselves. Then you don't have a relationship with that person that's acting like they're a price buyer when they're really not. And you start to bid. And then, of course, I did a couple of weeks ago with this UK team. They were talking a lot about we bid at everything. And I said, why are you bidding at everything? Like, you don't even know these people. Why would you give them a time of day? I mean, think about it in your personal life. If someone comes up to you and solicits something off the street, you probably say, thanks, I'm busy, no thanks, right? But in the business world, for whatever reason, somebody comes off the street and says, here's an RFP. And you say, okay, let's bid. And just changing that whole behavior is super important. And I do think salespeople, and that everybody agrees when I say it, we're ultimate optimists. We could win everything because we're darn good. And I think executives feel that way too sometimes. But if you don't have a relationship with a customer and you're asked to kind of blind bid, you really have to just adjust the mental model. I mean, it is what it is. You can't win everything.
It's funny. I was thinking about I've done some sales in the last 10 years. And I'm thinking back, like when you have something that comes in out of nowhere and just that optimism and the hope of like being the hero, and we're going to do the RFP and we're going to have this big business from the great logo, and we're going to have this new thing. It's so hard to pause and think about something like this at a time where a lot of people need that kind of hero,
Yeah, I think, that's a mental model, being the hero.
Yeah.
But I think we have to put the pause button on the optimism and do kind of an objective assessment of, do we really know them? I mean, what we say in negotiating with Backbone is that the definition of a relationship is significant historical business with a customer. And that might not be on exactly what you're trying to sell. It could be like on another product in your portfolio, but there's a relationship there.
Yep.
Or you have access to information to make a successful proposal, which means that you probably have access to the decision maker. So if you don't have one of those two things, significant historical business or access to this information to even make a successful proposal, you really got to do the optimism timeout. We'll call it that. I'm going to start using that workshop. Optimism timeout,
Yeah.
and be a realist, I think, at that point. And you know, executives need to stop pushing sellers to win at all cost and bid on every deal. You've got to really get lined up. What relationship do you really have? If your executive can't talk to their executive, probably no relationship, I would
Not a
guess.
good sign. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
So part of this I'm hearing is like knowing where you are, knowing what your position is a big part of getting out of the cost cutting mindset and into price getting
Yeah.
is the term
Yeah.
you use.
So
What
mindset,
are
I
the other
think,
things?
I
Yeah.
mean, we were talking about this earlier today. Like, I think people think they can really control costs. So that's why everybody, you know, whatever you can control, you're going to spend your time on. But if you could increase the control you had on either your price setting or your price communication, or even understanding value from an ROI perspective, you can control price. So I
Hmm.
think that's a mindset thing too. Like, we spend time on the things we think we can control or they're easier to control. And in the end, price is controllable because it's all about how it's communicated and being real with yourself. Is your product really differentiated? And does your customer value that differentiation? Then you can control price. So I think that is definitely a mindset of that needs to change. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. I wish it had changed a long time ago in the corporate world. And when it does change, it's actually transformative. I was lucky enough to be in one truly transformative company where it went from being the worst performing division in a global conglomerate to the best, largely in part by teamwork and the focus on getting what you deserve from a price perspective and not caving, just saying no. You know,
Mm,
we can't, being strong.
that's tough.
Yeah.
It's so tough. I it struck me how you're talking about control because I think the idea of some things feeling out of your control, I think cost cutting does seem like a very controllable thing. So how do you work with people to start to see the levers that they can control within price?
Well, I think first, you know, if you don't have a price volume mix model, which is, you know, what our pricing consultants do a great job of, if you don't even have that kind of binoculars on how price is happening in your company, that's step one. And to be honest, many companies don't do it. So first you have to know, what is the price driver? Is it a volume, or is it a mix, or is it a true price lever, right? So first you have to look at it that way, and it has to be done at a very detailed level. The second thing is really about that customer facing team. I hope I'm not repeating myself, but one of the things that used to really get to me was our product teams would say, Adele, why can't you get a higher price? Why can't you get our price target? You know, product teams set price targets because we have the best, whatever it is, you know, in the world. And I said, but what does that mean to the customer? And finally, we all got together and, you know, pulled out our calculators and talked about it and said, well, if we're at the best of this, then this is how it translates to our customer in terms of real benefit on their balance sheet or their P&L. And when you get to that point, you can control the price because it's not a discussion anymore. Because you know what you do to their P&L, then no, you don't give the price up anymore.
Yeah. Can you think of other examples where you've seen people really make a flip there or hold their ground in a way that didn't look likely before? I think these stories help too. You've seen so many over a billion years of doing this.
Yeah, I think, you know, when you start to think about the price, pricing in a different manner, like it is controllable, there are games being played, we have to align as a team. One of the things that came out of my most recent workshop was it takes us 4 months. This kind of goes back to the rabbit a little bit. It
Mhm.
takes us 4 months to qualify out an opportunity. And what this person meant was their metrics say that they have bad opportunities in their pipelines, ones that we're not going to win, that need the optimism time out. And today it's taken us 4 months to get them out of the pipeline, which means you're attending to them, you're spending time.
Yeah.
And if we can get them out of our pipeline faster because we diagnose our buyer type in our selling scenario correctly as an executive team, not as the seller alone, but all of us together, then we can focus on the ones that matter. And therefore you should be able to get a better price because you're not just spinning around shooting the price out there to everybody who doesn't care. You're actually targeting your effort, and you can give your sellers time to really think through the intricacies of value to price relationship. They only need 15 minutes. I mean, I do it all the time in workshops to say, okay, go into breakout. I want you to create as many feature benefit impact analysis calculations as you can. And in 15 minutes, they can come back with, an 80x ROI or 20 times, the price equation. So give them time instead of chasing those things that aren't winnable. I think
I would imagine, yeah, like the usage of resources just in terms of who's spending time on what. The RFPs, I guess, are a good example of that, right? People spend all this time putting together what's the solution and how is it all put together and all that stuff. But then the other thing is like, just in terms of how to get people on the same page internally, I bet is another big piece of this, and where you're going to hold the line on what, how do you read people? Where do you start with that?
I mean, I wish I'd had the backbone framework when I was in high tech. And, if my old boss, Steve, is watching this, no offense, Steve, but every Friday we would sit in a revenue meeting and just, say, when are we getting the volume? When are we getting the volume? We never really talked about whether that volume was good for us or whether or not we had any shot, any chance of winning with that customer. So again, I think it goes back to not everything's winnable. Where do we spend our time? What do we talk about in the meeting? Not just about when's the volume or the contract closing, but is this good business, and are we doing good business together? Like, are we doing valuable business with this customer? And do we have the relationships across the organization to get paid for what we're worth? If it's a seller to a procurement professional and it's constant grinding of price, it's probably not the customer you really want to do great things with, or have an executive spend time with the other executive. So I do think, when I think about everything's so busy, especially in corporate worlds today, nobody has any time. They go from meeting to meeting to meeting. Why not have a once a week? Well, to start with once a month, meeting in the boardroom to talk about what we all think about price and get it out there on the table. And then, really assign teammates to work together across the product team, people who service the customer, the sellers. And I implore sellers to act like kind of the coach of their internal teams, because that's the only way that it's all going to work. We got to get everybody together. We got to talk about what we truly believe about our price. Is it a good price? Do we do these valuable things that we think we do? And be confident. To me, it's that simple. But today, I think people spend too much time focused on the nitty gritty details of cost, right?
One of the things you're always saying too is like, keep it simple. So when you're sending these people off to do these calculations on the value and the feature benefit value, all of those things, even though it may take a little bit of time to sort out what that is, the output needs to be really simple. So people don't need to have all these spreadsheets and things when they're defending the cost to the clients, right?
Yeah, it just made me think about another story. May have told this one about the 40-year veteran who was sitting at the back of one of my workshops. And when we were going through the value calculator, he raised his hand and he said, "Can people be valuable?" I said, "Of course." And he goes, "Well, next time they ask me for a discount, I'm going to tell them if they want a discount, I'm no longer part of their team." And I said, "Why is that?" And he goes, "Because I'm the one with all the solutions in my head. I know how this stuff works. I know the problems that they need to solve. They don't." And I said, "Yeah, that's a valuable attribute. So don't just think about it as product. What else are we doing? How are our teams aligned? Who are the subject matter experts that give time to this customer? And should they? What reports do we give them? What insights do we give them? Are we all kind of aligned on that?" It's kind of just it's like rowing the boat the same way, right? That's
right.
the old adage. How do we all make sure for this particular customer, for this particular contract, for this particular negotiation, that we all see it the same way? I really do think it's that simple. Do we see it the same way?
Yeah. The other thing, as you're kind of painting the picture for the people internally and all the dynamics and under this pressure of cost cutting, the other thing you're making me think of is just how much time is spent on back and forth during poker playing.
Oh, well,
Can you talk a bit about that?
I'm pleased to say that I think people are catching on to poker playing a little faster maybe than they used to.
Yeah.
Um, and I asked the question a lot, like multiple RFP rounds is like a poker playing move. And I asked the questions to the sellers. I've been doing it now for 7 years. And I say, what's the purpose of the multiple RFP rounds? And they used to tell me, oh, well, it's to sharpen our pencils and get a lower price. And now they're actually confidently saying, sometimes I get a better price because I tell them it expired. And the other thing about multiple RFP rounds, I think, is you get your executives engaged and maybe acting on that fear of not getting that revenue. So I do feel like sellers are getting it a little bit more than maybe
Yeah.
7 years ago about these tactics and where should we spend our time. And you know what? If I don't know you and you're asking me to bid again on an RFP that I might have decided to do, even though I was a rabbit, I think people are kind of waking up to that. Like,
Mhm.
no. Yeah. We had one client that did a study of a whole year of what they called blind RFPs. So these would be like
Okay.
RFPs that came across in your email, kind of like you were talking about, just across the
Yeah.
table. And they said that they won less than 3%.
Mm.
So I think if people think about how many RFPs I respond to, and if I only have a 3% win rate, how could I be better at diagnosing where I really have a shot of that? And
Mhm.
we talk a lot negotiating with Backbone. If you get a blind RFP, what are some of the questions you might ask? One of them is, why are you calling me now?
Right.
You can't get an answer to why are you calling me now, then probably just want to use your price to lower the incumbent's price. But
Mhm.
having a dialogue instead of reacting,
Yeah.
you know, yeah. Yeah, the kind of optimistic timeout. Let's if we take that real quick.
You can always pick it back up. You
Yeah. Yeah, we
continue
can still be
on.
optimistic. We could just be realistically optimistic, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. What other things, just as you work with people and they're navigating this fear kind of environment, how else do you kind of reset people and what to look for and how to spend their time?
Well, I mean, we run role plays for one, just off
Yeah.
the top. And I was with a group about a month ago that they were fearful of running role plays. I said, well, first off, we're going to do them where you feel really comfortable. You're going to do it as, a team, and you're not going to do it in front of like the whole company here. We're just going to have you do it in a small group. So when I think about fear of being rejected or fear of being yelled at, I mean, we actually have to process all of that before we step in. Like, let's say I was negotiating with Tracy right now for a price. I would have had a whole role play with someone else on our team to think about what could Tracy throw at me. She seems kind of nice, but sometimes, she comes out from left field with some kind of request. How could I think about that in advance? And what am I going to do in response? So that's one thing. Just practice and play it through. If you play it through your head, then nothing is. You're not afraid of anything if you play it through.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is realizing that when people are abrasive or rude or beat you up in whatever way they do it, bold letters and emails, that's all part of them just trying to get a better price. Has nothing to do with you personally. And I think if you can just wipe off that personal thing, then you just
Mhm.
have more confidence. It's like nothing you can say to me that's gonna really change me as a human. Nothing you can say to me that's gonna change my price position because I know the value I bring. And just being kind of, I don't know, uh, ready for it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I was thinking about like just all of the different things that you must have seen over the years. I think in one of the previous videos you were talking about the guy that would fall asleep as a
Oh yeah.
tactic in
Oh yeah.
meetings to show that he didn't care or wasn't interested. What else have you seen just so people can look out for this stuff? Just
Oh,
tactics.
well, we had one guy, he still baffles me. I really truly believe his business model was such that he needed the low price provider. But he also played poker for whatever reason. In his own mind, I just think he thought he was a tough guy. And I went into a negotiation with three of our sales team. This is before negotiating with Backbone, and I could tell, like we were all having coffee. I'm like, "What's up?" And they're like, "Oh, we just don't want to deal with him. He's so difficult." And I said, "I think we might be the last people standing because he's so difficult." And they're like, You think so? I said, yeah, I heard through the grapevine our competitors aren't going to deal with him anymore. So why don't we just have fun and let him do his stuff? And we just sit there and say, okay, okay. And then finally we did it and everybody came out and went out for drinks after and said, yeah, everybody else left him because they were tired of him. So
So you should end
sometimes
at the end and watch the show.
yeah, pop the popcorn, get ready to go. Yeah. Yeah. Or just say, that's very interesting. Very interesting. Threaten me. Very interesting. Yeah. I think another one that came up recently was a fellow that realized he had a poker player because there was a consultant on board. And this happened a few weeks ago too, when someone raised their hand in our session and they said, Adele, there's a consultant involved. I said, surefire playing poker with you. And they changed their mental model about what that was going to be like. That they really thought through. We talked about it. So what's this consultant on board to do? Get a better price. Are they there to define the spec? No, spec's fine. Are they there to select the vendor? No, vendor's been selected. What is their role? Get better price. Okay, now I have that mental model. Then how do I prepare to deal with the consultant? Well, I keep my business supporters informed that I'm not planning to reduce price. And if we keep going through these meetings with no resolution, then we'll just pull back our contract. And they did it. Actually, it happened in the workshop week. And the person actually did a whole like accountability presentation. I'll have to dig it out. That they felt more confident having thought through the scenario of why that person was even involved. What's their role? And I like to tell the story of some folks in Belgium before COVID, some of my last trips overseas before COVID. And a seller went to talk to someone in their own procurement department because I don't think he believed me, what we were talking about in the classroom. And he came back and he's like, oh my goodness. He said, my procurement professional said something very profound. And I said, please tell me. He said, I'd rather have your job, Mr. Seller. Mr. Seller's like, what? You want my job? And he's like, yeah, I have to buy. You don't have to sell. And I thought, that's a way to think about it. So procurement people's main job in a company is to procure. It's not to price gouge or price cut. It's to actually get what they need to do work. And as a seller, you have a chance to really understand that in a different way and then just put up with whatever mess they send you through. Be prepared. Yeah, I think Dr. Holden says, be prepared for the procurement gauntlet. And if you're mentally prepared for that and you have your executive team, not kind of coming at you with this whole fear-based, we got to make the quarter type of lingo, then you can stand firm. And, pricing is way more powerful in a profit statement than cost cutting. So if you can hold or get better price, then you don't need a cost cut. That's always what I think about it. So we should spend more time there as a group.
Yeah. That's good. And I think a big part of that is figuring out what kind of support the sellers need, what kind of training they need, where are the places where as a seller organization, they're the weakest, and all of these things kind of get worked out as you're working on their backbone and making sure they have what they need to defend their value there.
Yeah. And training is great. It imparts new concepts, new ways of thinking. And then the most important thing is coach, whether it's a Holden coach or your sales leader's coach. And that's another way I think that people get it wrong. Sales leaders typically have accounts that they deal with and they have quota. What if sales leaders actually just coached? Like you had enough resource to just coach and not cut so much that your sales leaders actually had to manage accounts. If you had a really good coaching philosophy and you didn't have that cost-cutting mentality, then there would be a lot more time spent on getting a better price instead of everybody just running around trying to close deals all the time. So that would be the other thing I'd ask all the executives out there. Really think about how you can train up or mentor sales leaders to be good sales coaches and what tools do they need to be good sales coaches. And you're going to get like 10x, 20x return. But instead, in the profit-minded world, we cut, and when we cut sales organizations or cut SG&A, then sales leaders aren't just leaders anymore. They have, accounts therefore they have less time to focus on their teams.
Mm. All right. So I've got a couple takeaways. I think like the thing that stood out to me the most has been the shift from cost cutting to price getting, and the big impact that fear has and how it can really like infiltrate the environment, the sales team, everybody individually. And I think that's a really interesting place to kind of keep getting perspectives from you. And I have a couple ideas for other videos that we can do, but I think this is a good place to pause. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Tracy. Always fun.
Excellent. All right. See you soon.
All right. Bye.